Adam Bandt, welcome to 7:30.
Hi, Laura.
What do you think finally pushed the government over the line to offer this extra $1 billion now? And why were you happy to accept it, given that you haven't got what you wanted for renters?
Yeah, so we're in a housing and rental crisis in this country, and there are millions of people who are one rent increase away from eviction, and we need money now for building new public and community homes. The government's plan, when it first hit the decks, the legislation didn't include guaranteed funding, and we were talking at most $500 million. We've, under our pressure, since the legislation was first tabled, we've now secured $3 billion, $2 billion that's already in state government coffers, an additional $1 billion today, to be spent on public and community housing. And that's money that's available this year, not in the future, not dependent on whether a gamble on the stock market pays off, but that's real money that's available this year. That was enough for us to agree to pass the legislation. What we couldn't get from the government was to care for renters. What is crystal clear is that there's now one party in Canberra that is fighting for renters, and that's the Greens. Labor, on the other hand, has backed unlimited rent increases. Well, that's a fight we're not going to give up, and we're going to escalate it.
Well, let's come back to renters in a minute. Just to be clear, though, Julie Collins, the Housing Minister, was talking today about the fact the government wanted to be sure that there was enough capacity to build these housing without adding to inflation. Have you been able to get any data to suggest that things have slowed down enough in the construction sector that there's capacity to build these houses in the next year? I mean, it's already September.
Look, the message that we're hearing from the industry and from workers in the industry is that when you look at the record high, or the high interest rates and the pressure that people are under, record high house prices at the moment, is that there's actually a looming drop-off come the end of the year, and construction industry has been looking for work to start in the coming months when we're potentially going to fall off that cliff. This now, thanks to the Greens, there's now that $3 billion available that'll be available for public and community homes, and it's available now.
So it could become quite an important economic stimulus from both the economy's perspective, your perspective, and the government's perspective, just as things start to get a bit quiet.
Well, and building more public housing is a business that governments used to be in, and we're trying to get governments back into the business of doing it because it makes sure that people have an affordable roof over their head, it provides decent, well-paid jobs, and I think it's what people expect governments to be spending money on, and it's been part of our concern with this model from the government so far. It's like we don't fund schools or hospitals by putting a gamble on the stock market and hoping it pays off. Government just spends money, and now we've been able to get the government to spend money on public and community housing.
Sure. So what's happened here now is they've put some money into a separate fund which will be for direct spending on public housing. In return, you're agreeing to support their investment fund, which is going to deliver this $500 million a year. Is there a possibility that there's going to be a gap between that upfront spend and the return from the fund? And does that mean you'll be wanting more money upfront next year?
Well, one of the things that we've learned over the last few months is that pressure from the Greens works. The government was telling us for a very long time that they couldn't directly fund public housing. We said the money is there and the need is there. Look, if there are future shortfalls, then I hope the government understands that part of its role should be to step in and ensure that we're directly investing in public housing. We've secured $3 billion, and we think that was enough for us to pass the legislation. But as you've mentioned, like the fight for us now turns to renters. Rent freeze and rent caps is something this country needs. We need to give people and renters some breathing space while all these new homes are being built, and we're going to keep pushing on that.
We have seen over the last few months, you've pushed very hard on rental arrangements. We've seen all state and territory governments effectively sort of say either no or that they can only do things at the margins. Given that everybody's basically saying, look, this isn't going to work, why are you going to keep pushing, or are you going to push something a little bit different?
The housing system is cooked in this country, Laura. We've got people who can't afford not only to buy a home, but even to rent near where they work or where their families are or where they're studying. And we've got a government that's just offering half measures and that will see the problem get worse. And we are pushing for government to accept that we're facing big crises. I think the government's still in small target mode, but small target government will not fix the big problems Australia is facing. They weren't even talking about renters before the election, and in the 9 months that we've debated this bill, we've put renters squarely on the national agenda. Yes, we've secured some money for housing now, which was one of our two key things we were pushing for. And now we'll turn to renters. And look, they told us that money wasn't available and then they found some. And Labor's now backing unlimited rent rises. But I don't think that's tenable. And I think as we go to the next election, with a third of the country renting, Labor premiers and prime ministers saying to everyone the landlord can jack up your rent as much as you like is not a tenable solution, because if they keep up with that, then this housing crisis is going to turn into a humanitarian crisis.
So you've said that you've got other legislation where your vote's crucial, and that's obviously going to be part of the negotiations. What's the next big legislative fight for the Greens? Is it the petroleum resource rent tax?
Well, there's a number of measures that the government wants to get through. The government said that it wants to look at taxing the big gas corporations, but the tax that they're proposing was written by the big gas corporations. The big gas corporations are urging us to pass it. We are in a cost of living crisis and a climate crisis. It makes sense to tax the big corporations and use that money to deliver cost of living relief for everyday people. But there's more housing legislation that the government wants to introduce, and we'll keep fighting for rent freeze and rent caps. And of course, the government's continues to put off its environment and climate legislation. The Environment Minister is approving coal mines. We've got 5 projects that have been approved while we're in a climate crisis and heading to the worst summer since the Black Summer. That legislation may come sometime in the coming months, and we'll be pushing hard for action on coal and gas.
Well, we'll discuss all of those things with you further, but we're out of time now. Thanks for your time tonight, Adam Bandt.
Thanks, Laura.